Well, thank you very much for your kind words of introduction. Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Well, President Bon of the Korean Society of Legal Excellencies and ladies and gentlemen, well, let me extend the warmest welcome to this session. And as you know, that this session is taking place in the context of the annual conference of the Korean Society of Law. And first, let me introduce myself to you. I was introduced to you, but at the moment I'm teaching public international law at School of Law, Civil Relations. Well, actually, another professor, Professor Taehan, who is teaching at Harvard University, who is a well-known, renowned specialist in the field of international criminal law. He was supposed to moderate this session, but there are some circumstances preventing him from playing his role here as a moderator. That's the reason I'm in a way stepping in for him. So I feel lucky. At the same time, I was staying in Berlin, Germany, and I got a call from him. And luckily, I had a schedule to visit Korea, so I accepted his kind invitation. So I feel very honored and fortunate to be working as a moderator for this session. Well, this conference is taking place today and tomorrow, so it will run for 2 days, and this is a rather special session. So as you can see in the program of the conference, this is an international symposium, and it will deal with the activation of the ICC, International Criminal Court, jurisdiction over the crime of aggression, which is quite a significant development in international law, especially in the field of international criminal law. So I think this activation, a decision to activate the crime of aggression, the ICC jurisdiction for the crime of aggression was, the resolution was adopted last December, and it was decided that the jurisdiction of the ICC over the crime of aggression will be activated starting from July 17th of this year. So July 17th, that's a very symbolic date. That's the date when the Rome Statute, ICC Rome Statute, was adopted in Rome 20 years ago. That is on 17th July 1998. So that date, that very symbolic date, was adopted for that purpose. So you can say that the ICC's jurisdiction over the crime of aggression has been activated for the past 3 months. And when it comes to the international criminal law, especially the ICC, I think Korea has played an important role in this field. So in the Rome Conference for the adoption of the ICC statute, Korea played a very instrumental role. Korea was very instrumental in contributing to the final production of the Rome statute. In particular, with particular reference to a very controversial Article 12, prevention to the jurisdiction of the ICC. And as we all know, Korea has produced 2 ICC judges. First, Professor Song Sang-man, and he went on to serve as president of the ICC for 2 consecutive terms. And now we have Judge Jeong Sang-ho, who is playing a very active role within the court at the moment. As we all know, Korea has played a very prominent role in this field, as is demonstrated by the president of this society, president of Society of Korean Society of Law, President Bon, who served in the the ICTY. He played a very eminent role in that tribunal, and now he's serving as president of the Assembly, ICC Assembly of State Parties. Right, so I think it is very, we are holding this conference, at a very opportune moment. And so, and I think we have an excellent panel. So, let me first of all extend my sincere thanks to all the participants, especially the participants, foreign participants that come all the way from the world for this conference, and of course, two Korean commentators. So first, let me briefly introduce them to you. First, our first speaker is His Excellency Sergio Ubalde, Ambassador of Costa Rica to the Netherlands and former Vice President of the Assembly of States Parties. And as you will see from his presentation, he was on the spot when this monumental decision was reached in New York last December. And he was chairperson of the International Commission. He is chairperson of the International Law Commission at Costa Rica's Foreign Ministry. And he was former acting president of the 16th ASP, Assembly of State Parties, where the crime of corruption was activated. I already mentioned this by consensus by 123 state parties. And he represented Costa Rica's last 6 cases before the ICC as counsel, advocate, and court agent. So you can see that Costa Rica is very active in before the ICJ and before the international judicial forums, and so he plays a very important role in that respect as well. And then our second speaker is Professor Dr. Klaus Kress. So he is a he holds a chair for German and international criminal law, and at the same time he is the director of the Institute of International Peace and Security Law at the University of Cologne, and he has more than 150 publications on the use of force, the law of armed conflict, and international criminal law. And he has been a member of the Germany's delegations in the negotiations regarding the ICC since 1998. And he's an eminent authority in the field of international criminal law, which is confirmed by the fact that he received MC Basili Justice Award, one of the most outstanding honors in the field of international criminal law. And then let me go on to our third speaker, Professor Alice Whiting. He is a professor of practice on domestic and international criminal prosecution issues at Harvard Law School, and he was a former prosecution coordinator in the Office of the Prosecutor at the ICC. And then he was former senior trial attorney with the ICTY, and he was the lead prosecution counsel in Prosecutor versus Dragomir Milosevic. And he was former federal prosecutor with the U.S. Attorney's Office in Boston. So as you can see, that he has accumulated quite tremendous experience in the field of criminal in general and in particular in international criminal law. So as you can see that we have excellent speakers, a list of excellent speakers who can address the question we are going to deal with. And at the same time, we have two Korean commentators who are quite well known in Korea and abroad. First, let me briefly introduce Professor Kim Young-suk. Well, his CV is quite long, so I should go brief. Professor Kim Young-suk, he received his JSP. Well, he was a Korean diplomat before turning to academia. So he was practicing diplomat, and then he pursued his doctoral degree at the University of Vienna-Champaign, and he received his JSD at that renowned institution. And then he has been working as a professor of international law at Ewha Women's University, and he is one of the best-known authorities, especially on international criminal law in Korea. So he has attended all these ICC-related conferences for a very long time. Okay, and then another commentator of ours is Brigadier General Hong Chang-sik. So he received his Bachelor of Arts LLB from Gyeongbuk National University, and then he did his Master's Law at Gyeongbuk National University. He also received LLM in International Law in 2002 at George Washington University in the States. And in 1993, he was commissioned as a Judge Advocate of the Republic of Korea Army. And he is now working as the Chief Judge of the High Military Court of Korea. Okay, right. So, could you please welcome by a round of warm applause. Right. So I introduced our panel to you, and then before handing over the floor to our first speaker, let me just briefly introduce our subject to you. I'm doing this. I may be too paternalistic, but I'm doing this to you because this is a very specialized field of international law. So, for the benefit of your best understanding of ensuing presentations and discussion, let me briefly describe what we are going to deal with in this session. And again, for the benefit, since most of the audience are Korean, let me give this explanation in Korean, just for 3 or 4 minutes. 저 방금 말씀드린 바와 마찬가지로 모델을 오늘 참석해 주신 여러분께 깊이 감사드립니다. 오늘 우리 이 세션에서는 다루게 된 주제가 국제형사법, 그중에서 ICC, 국제형사법에서 가장 중요한 역할을 한다고 하시는 상설국제재판소, ICC 관련되어 있는 International Criminal Court에 관해서 논의하게 되는데요. 그중에서 특히 아주 그동안 과장된 표현이 아니라 역사적인 그런 결정이 있었습니다. 그래서 바로 작년 12월 뉴욕에서 개최되었던 제11차 당사국총회입니다. ICC 로마 유형 당사국총회에서 아주 중요한 결정이 이루어졌습니다. 그것이 바로 침략범죄, crime of aggression에 대해서 ICC가 관할을 행사하십니다. 그런 결정입니다. 그래서 어떻게 보면 기술적인 내용들이 있고 해서 그 배경을 간략히 말씀드리겠습니다. 아마 잘 아시는 분도 전문 분들 중에 계십니다만 또 그렇지 않은 분들도 계실 것 같아가지고 간략히 말씀드리겠습니다. 여러분 잘 아시다시피 이 로마교주는 ICC 로마교주는 1998년도에 채택이 되었습니다. 그리고 2002년도 7월 1일에 발효를 했습니다. 그래서 이제 ICC가 구성이 돼서 지금 활동을 하고 있는데 ICC의 관할 대상 범죄는 로마 규정 5조 1항에 4가지로 규정이 되어 있습니다. 잘 아시다시피 그래서 제노사이드, 그 다음에 또 crimes of humanity, 인류 반환죄, 그 다음에 또 war crimes, 전쟁 범죄가 있고 그 다음에 보시게 되면 바로 crime of aggression이 있습니다. 침략 범죄. 근데 이 침략 범죄에 대해서는 바로 이 98년도에 특히 비đồng盟 국가들을 중심으로 해가지고 이런 국가들이 반드시 이 범죄가 포함되어야 한다. 즉 ICC의 관할 대상 범죄가 되어야 한다는 주장이 있었습니다만 과연 이 crime of aggression, 침략 범죄를 어떻게 정의할 것이냐. 또 그 행사 조건을 어떻게 정할 것인가에 대해서 논란이 대단히 많았습니다. 그래서 이미 말씀드린 바와 마찬가지로 7월 17일 날 98년 7월 17일 날 로마 규칙이 채택되었는데 그 일주일 전에 7월 10일 날 의장단 그 회의, 로마 회의 의장단 뷰로라고 해서 어떻게 얘기하냐면 침략 범죄에 대해서 즉시 수용 가능한 조속한 시기에 수용 가능한 그런 그 정의조항과 그 다음에 행사여부를 제시하지 않으면 로마 규칙에 포함될 수 없다고 그렇게까지 얘기했습니다. 그런데 거기에 대해서 비동맹 국가를 중심으로 해서 상가국들에서 상당히 반발이 있어가지고 타일처리 일입니다. 그래서 어떻게 타일처리 일하냐면 우리가 5조 2항입니다. 그래서 5조 2항에다가 관할 대상 범죄로서는 크라임 오브 어그레션을 포함을 시키지만은 5조 2항의 규정을 들어서 추후에 관할 침략 범죄에 대한 정의라든지 definition, 그 다음에 또 행사 요건에 관해서 그것이 합의가 이루어지면 그때 가서 비로소 ICC가 침략 범죄에 대해서 관할 행사하는 것이죠. 그런 식의 타입이 이루어집니다. 그러니까 관할 대상 범죄로 일단 포함은 됐습니다. 뭐 직접 포함됐습니다만 실제로 ICC가 관할권을 행사하기 위해서는 넘어야 될 허들이 몇 가지 있을 것입니다. 그렇게 해서 2002년도에 ICC 로마 규칙을 일단은 발의했는데 좀 간략히 말씀드리겠습니다. 중간에 노력을 통해서 스페셜 워킹 그룹의 노력을 통해서 이제 2010년도에 열린 캄팔라 회의에서 침략 범죄에 관한 그런 정의조항, 그 다음에 거기에 대한 행사 요건, 이런 행사 요건들이 어멘드먼트, 개정의 방식으로 규정들이 됩니다. 그런데 거기에 대해서 또 다시 또 두 가지의 또 허들이 있었습니다. 조건이 있었습니다. 하나는 뭐냐면 일단은 30개 이상의 30개국의 다사국 중에 30개국의 비준주는 액센트가 수락이 있어야만 처리가 되는 것입니다. 그런 다음에도 2017년 1월 1일 이후에 당사국 3분의 2 이상이면 결의가 있습니다. 그러한 두 가지의 요건이 추가적으로 됐습니다. 그러니까 첫 번째는 1998년도에 그렇게 규정이 된 것이고 2010년도에 와서 캄팔라 회의가 있었는데 그동안 개정은 성공적으로 이루어졌습니다만 또 다시 그런 요건이 들어온 것이죠. 그런데 2016년도 와서 6월 20일에 팔레스타인 30번째 그 개정에 대한 개정조항에 대한 비준이 되었습니다. 그러니까 1년 후에 발효하게 됩니다. 그러려면 개정조항이 2016년도 6월 27일에 팔레스타인 침략범죄 개정조항의 30번째 기준이 되어서 따라서 ICC에 관한 문제는 2017년도 6월 27일 이후에 당사국들이 결정한 시점에 개시할 수 있게 된 것입니다. 그리고 바로 그런 배경 하에서 작년에 12월에 제11차 ICC 로마 감사원 총회에서 바로 이걸 개시한다. 금년 7월 7일부터 개시한다라는 결정이 된 것입니다. 예. 그래서 오늘 오늘 배경을 말씀드립니다. 그래서 오늘 세 분의 발표를 하면서 구간대 대상들은 장례 회의에서 이런 문제가 그동안 연구와 장례 회의에서 뜻있게 진행됩니다. 그리고 크레스 교수님께서는 특히 그 과정에서 특히 쟁점이 있던 사람들이 어떤 것에 대해서 말씀해 주시고, 그 다음에 와이팅 교수님은 이러한 좀 더 포괄적인 그런 관점에서 ICC가 하는 프로젝트에 대한 몇 가지 좀 되새기론에 대해서 비판적인 그런 의미를 제시할 것으로 그렇게 알고 있습니다. 예, 제가 뭐 시간을 마쳤는데, without further ado, let me hand over the floor to our first speaker, Ambassador Uganda, please.
Good afternoon, Excellency Wong, President of the Assembly of Tax Parties to the International Criminal Court and President of the Korean Society of Law. Excellencies, distinguished professors, President Whiting, panel members, ladies and gentlemen. I am honored to address you today in this international symposium on the activation of the crime cooperation, which is taking place as part of the 11th Korean Jurist Conference. I also wish to congratulate you on the celebration of the 70 years of the Constitution and the evolution of Korean law. I'm delighted to be back in Seoul some 20 years after I first came. The changes I have seen, particularly concerning peace and development, are truly remarkable, and I foresee a very great future for the Korean people. I also wish to convey my admiration for President Wong, an internationally recognized jurist dedicated to the cause of peace, justice, and international law, and whose leadership and steady character will prove vital at this critical point in the Rome discussion's 20-year history. And I thank him for his invitation to speak to you today. I have been asked to reflect on the activation of the crime cooperation last year in New York at a gripping finale to the 16th session of the Assembly of Tax Parties, which I was trusted to preside. I will briefly reflect on the origins of the crime cooperation as follows. As you know, the crime cooperation did begin to have some traction after World War I, when the victorious powers tried to attribute criminal responsibility on Kaiser Wilhelm II for that war, which ultimately was spared a trial by seeking asylum in the Netherlands. The Nuremberg Tribunal will be the first international tribunal to prosecute the crime of aggression. This tribunal characterized aggression as a crime against peace and will say that it constituted the supreme international crime. Although there was momentum to adopt a definition about the crime of aggression at the United Nations in the 1950s, after numerous commissions and proposals, it was only on 14 December 1974 that the General Assembly will adopt a definition. They adopted chiefly that aggression will be the use of armed force by a state against the sovereignty, territorial integrity, or political independence of another state, or in any manner inconsistent with the Charter of the United Nations as set out in this definition. The resolution provides for a number of provisions which I will not address today. Notwithstanding this important step, the curious thing is that we have a definition under international law, but we have no way to enforce it. Several international criminal tribunals were established, but none would be given jurisdiction to try aggression. It was to change with the International Criminal Court. If anything, the move to set up the ICC was prompted to a significant degree by the will to empower an independent criminal jurisdiction to try the crime of aggression. Yet, strong forces kept that from happening. The ICC was indeed established in 1998, including the crime of aggression among its core crimes. However, aggression was not defined for the purpose of the ICC, and thus neither was the ICC's jurisdiction activated. It took countless years of negotiations, as well as a review conference in 2010, to adopt the legal definition of aggression within the Rome Statute. That definition will come to reflect the 1974 UN General Assembly resolution, with some essential understandings as part of the package of amendments to the Rome Statute that allows for consensual agreement. Therefore, the Kampala Review Conference did adopt a definition, but could not come to agree on activating the jurisdiction of the court over the crime. This shows just how difficult and complex the matter had become. The different forces at play in Kampala negotiated that activation could only take place after 30 ratifications of the amendments on the crime of aggression had been secured, after 2017, and with at least two-thirds majority of votes of the Assembly of the States Parties. Those who oppose the activation of the Crown of Operation believe that it would be nearly impossible to fulfill all that criteria. During the 15th session of the Assembly of the States Parties in 2016, by coincidence, I was also entrusted with presiding the closure of that assembly. The States Parties, after a long negotiation, had decided that the activation required a facilitation because some states felt that the language from Kampala was ambiguous. Therefore, the Assembly appointed a highly qualified Austrian diplomat. She was tasked to carry out consultations over the course of 2017 with the purpose of proposing to the following Assembly language that would allow activation by consensus. However, a year passed by and no consensus had been achieved. The 16th session of the Assembly of the States Parties began in New York on 4 December 2017. Our main task was to elect Judge Kwon as president for the following 3 years, which was adopted by a standing ovation. The then President of the Assembly, His Excellency Mr. Siddiqui Kaba from Senegal, had to leave after just the first day, and I was tasked to carry out most of the work of the Assembly, including the election of 6 judges, which I managed to do in record time. However, we were not as lucky with the activation of the Crown Corporation, as you will come to see. On the last day of the Assembly, that is on the 14th of December, we were supposed to begin the last session at 3 p.m. However, we had to give way to further negotiations by the Austrian facilitator, who 3 hours later had exhausted all possible venues and announced to the Assembly that the year-long facilitation had been unsuccessful and thus she was ending it. So, there we were at 6 p.m. on the last day of the Assembly, and after 1 full year of negotiations with no clear path to activate the Crown of Operation. As a matter of fact, with no path at all. You may ask, what was the problem? Well, in a nutshell, the problem was that on the one hand, we had about 30 delegations who believed on what is called simple activation. This meant that the Assembly was tasked to say simply, the Crown of Operation is hereby activated. Or I mean, better said, the jurisdiction on the Crown of Operation was activated. However, the underlying interpretation was that the court would have jurisdiction over any country which was party to the Rome Statute, regardless of whether it had ratified the Kampala amendments of the Rome Statute. And even if that country had declared that it did not accept the jurisdiction of the court or the so-called opt-out route. On the other hand, there were about 20 delegations led by 2 powerful Western countries who refused to accept the activation if there was no language in the resolution stating in absolutely clear terms that the court could not exercise and did not have any jurisdiction over the states parties which had not ratified the amendments. The other question you may have is, why not wait another year to reach consensus and activate, let's say, in December 2018? Simply put, because if we failed to activate in New York then and there, it was likely that we would have never been able to activate at all, given the shift in today's international politics. Together with the Italian ambassador to the United Nations, who was the other vice president, we decided to hear out the positions of all the relevant players. We did this between 6 p.m. and 7 p.m. We noted that positions were too entrenched to allow for a negotiation. With the assistance of some insiders, we formulated a draft which came to be known as the Vice President's proposal. This proposal, we were told by the insiders, which was afresh, could reach the necessary consensus. I went ahead as advised and opened the session at about 8:45 p.m. I was told to leave the issue of activation to the end, but I knew better,
because the success or the failure of the assembly, or that particular assembly, rested on whether we could activate the jurisdiction or not. I also was wary to put the matter to vote, which I was asked to do as well, because simply math told me that there were not enough votes to activate. We required a two-thirds majority of the 123 states parties, meaning we needed 83 positive votes, and yet we had at best 50 positive votes, as my reading was that most delegations would abstain. In addition, putting the matter to a vote, even if the two-thirds majority were achievable, meant that there was not a solid vacuum to activation, thus diminishing the political and legal force of the activation of the crime, the jurisdiction of the court over the crime of aggression. So I refused to put the matter to vote until all possible venues had been fully exhausted. Having started the last session of the Assembly, and with the full support of the incoming President Josh Kwon, I announced that we would deal with the activation of the crime of aggression first, and that we were giving the Assembly a historical opportunity to act in this regard. I presented the Assembly with a text, which I said was non-negotiable, and declared a 30-minute recess, so delegations could look at the proposed language. However, very quickly I was made aware that the language we had proposed was lacking two fundamental points. The oversight in confidence appeared to have been triggered by an advisor. Understanding the seriousness of the situation, I called back the Assembly and informed them of this oversight, which I justified in the rush and pressure of our late evening work. This time, however, I decided to get a computer and complete the draft myself. The Assembly was shocked, to say the least, that I had decided to suspend the meeting once more. I returned 15 minutes later with the corrected version. This time I said it was indeed a true take it or leave it proposal. I gave the states parties 15 minutes and then opened the debate at around 10 p.m. What was that late evening proposal? It was fairly simple. The first paragraph proposed the activation on 17th of July, which is a highly symbolic day, as had been said earlier. The second paragraph restated what had been agreed in Kampala concerning the jurisdiction of the court vis-à-vis states that have not ratified the amendments. But the third paragraph reiterated the independence of the court, which means that it is up to the court to ultimately determine if it has jurisdiction to entertain a case concerning the crime of aggression in relation to any state party to the Rome Statute. So 40 delegations took the floor to set out their positions, many of them in a quite dramatic fashion. At a certain point, a delegation challenged the presidency, requesting for a vote. I stated that I had not closed the debate and that I would pose the matter for decision when the debate was closed. At 11:59 p.m. on the 14th of December, I announced to the Assembly that I, under the power of the presidency, was stopping the clock, meaning that the work would carry on after midnight, but that by a legal fee, the work would be to have taken place on 14 December before midnight. So there you go. By 00:30 a.m., a number of proposals for amendments to the Vice President's text had been proposed, including one which I genuinely thought was doable, as long as it would allow us to attain consensus. In the meantime, I was in close eye contact with the main players, hoping that they would not obstruct progress. At 00:37 in the morning of that day, one delegation requested a 5-minute recess for a final consultation. About 50 delegations pleaded with me not to grant the recess. However, I knew that the consultation that delegation needed to carry out was critical to the activation, and therefore I granted them not 5 but 3 minutes recess. At exactly 00:40 a.m., I opened the floor for the last time, expecting a last-minute deal. However, much to my surprise, no one requested the floor. Then, feeling this was the moment of truth, I said, well, here we go, and it's time to make a decision. So we moved to adopt the Vice President's proposal and asked the Assembly if we could adopt it by consensus. The longest and most silent 5 seconds in the history of the crime of aggression flew by. I hammered the gavel swiftly, and thus we achieved consensus on the activation, which materialized, or which did materialize, on 17 July 2018, the day of the 20th anniversary of the Rome Statute. Needless to say, the conference room exploded in joy. As one delegate had put it, we had hit the target with a bullet with half the gunpowder at twice the distance. The assembly would close that night at 2:24 a.m., exhausted but fully satisfied given the landmark achievement which brought to fruition what had been a dream for many decades. Given the time constraints, I will not address some of the challenges that the ICC will face concerning the activation, a subject which I think the professors will give. But once again, I would like to thank you very much for your kind invitation and attention, and if there is any questions, I'll be very happy to answer them. Thank you again.
Well, Ambassador Banda, thank you very much for your very vivid and even breathtaking description of what happened on that day. Probably one of the longest days in the history of international law. Well, so thank you very much again. He presided over the meeting, the 16th ASP. On that day, so again, in a way, you heard from the directly from the forces so it's really dramatic process without. But at the same time, you see there are some serious division of opinion among the state parties as well. So I'm sure that we'll address both sides of the question in the serious discussion, putting together discussion. Well, once again, thank you very much for your wonderful presentation. And let me give the floor to our next second speaker, Professor Press, please.
Mr. Chairperson, Excellencies, distinguished President Gong, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished colleagues. Thank you so much to the Korean Society for giving me the privilege to address you today. In particular, as it is my first visit to Korea and to Seoul, so quite a happy professional and private moment for me. Imagine we are approaching November 2018, think 100 years back, the First World War drawing to its close, and that in a sense was the beginning of a fascinating journey, international legal journey, which has culminated, as we have heard, only a few days before. So also for this reason, the Korean Society has beautifully chosen this year, almost 100 years of legal, diplomatic, political debate, culminating in an ultimate breakthrough. About 70 years after the so-called creative precedent was set in Nuremberg, so rightfully against nationals of my home state, Germany, who had committed outrageous wars of aggression and had put the world to a situation of catastrophe, shortly followed by another confirming creative precedent in Tokyo, as you are well aware. So one should not use this term too lightly. I believe it is risky of being abused, but here I am fully convinced that the use of this term is justified. The activation of the International Criminal Court's jurisdiction over the crime of aggression as from 17 July this year is a historic event, at least from a perspective of international law, but I would argue beyond. A little bit of this fascinating journey has already been recaptured by our moderator, and we just had the immense privilege to listen firsthand to the dramatic final hours, moments, and even seconds of this 100-year-long drama. I have tried in an editorial comment to the Journal of International Criminal Justice that you find reprinted in your conference folders to take readers through this fascinating journey a little longer than I can justify to do in my oral remarks. So for all of those among you interested in familiarize you or to refresh your memory a little further about what I really think is a fascinating journey, because so many of the core questions of international law have come to be debated, I respectfully refer you to this essay. I rather want to confine the limited time of my presentation to three small parts. I will say a few words about why I deem it's historic. It's not enough to say it has taken 100 years. So why? What is the significance? I will elaborate a little further than the moderator in his opening remarks on the elements of the ultimate compromise. I will deal with the substantive definition first and then with the jurisdiction. And I shall conclude with a look ahead, which is probably also a look ahead to what my distinguished colleague and friend Alex Whiting will then take up, and what we can deepen in our debate. But before doing this, let me pay a tribute, and first and foremost a tribute to Korea, to Korea's contribution, we have heard about it, to the enterprise of international criminal justice over the past more than 20 years, as from what I would call the renaissance, the revival of a subject matter that had almost been forgotten in decades of dormancy after the creative precedents that I've mentioned until the early 1990s. As from that time we have gone through turbulent decades with a lot of progress, achievements, institutionalization that only few had thought was possible. And I wish to pay tribute because Korea has been at the forefront as a supporter of this development. This is true in terms of personalities, and personalities matter so much, and I could go into great length to also demonstrate this with regard to the crime of aggression. Without certain personalities, this historic breakthrough would not have come about. But that's true for international criminal law in general. And so, as he is present among us, let me pay a personal tribute to the President of the Assembly of States Parties, and that's only his most recent position. And it is a position which I think symbolizes Koreans' support, and I wish to emphasize principled support. The support which goes to the key pillars without which this enterprise of international criminal justice will not be successful, because it will not be legitimate. And it is so important to have delegations in this process who know until what point compromises are possible and reasonable, and beyond which point they risk to jeopardize the legitimacy of the overall undertaking. But having the privilege of the ambassador's presence here, let me also say a word of gratitude to Costa Rica as a delegation, perhaps not the world's leading military power, but certainly a powerful supporter of the principles underlying international criminal justice. And I recall, even before the ambassador got active, Costa Rica's important role throughout the Assembly of States Parties in December. And then my personal thanks, Ambassador, to you. I have been working on this dossier for about 20 years, since 1998 when I joined Germany's delegation. Germany has been in support of this breakthrough consistently, and the ambassador was 100% right. We were, as all the others, uncertain until the very last second whether a compromise could be achieved, just because the opposition from a minority, small in numbers but significant in influence, was so strong to the very end. And it was a relief to have this dossier in capable hands, because to steer it through these last minutes, and I can assure you these last minutes and seconds have been the most outstanding ones, even though I had Rome and Kampala also as a memory in my package. That was due to the ambassador's skillfulness. So thank you personally for doing this job, this mission so masterful. Why is the breakthrough so significant? Well, only with this breakthrough, ladies and gentlemen, the ICC statute is complete. It has taken another 20 years, as we were reminded, from 1998, but not taking this decision would have meant to adopt the legacy of Nuremberg and Tokyo, where the entire enterprise started, only by 3/4. War crimes, genocide, crimes against humanity, utterly important crimes. But one crime was missing, and it was that crime of which those instituting the historic precedent in Nuremberg and Tokyo thought it was the most important component. Robert Jackson, the charismatic US chief prosecutor, was mostly together with his administration after setting a creative precedent against waging unlawful wars. The memory of Germany's wars of aggression was fresh in everybody's mind. This was what Nuremberg and Tokyo was all about. We have come to recognize over the decades that follows how tremendously important the other crimes under international law also are. Nobody would dare for a minute to diminish the significance of war crimes, genocide, crimes against humanity, which are probably in practical terms even more important nowadays. But to say that waging unlawful wars has lost its significance would commit, I think, a dangerous understatement. We need, as we need a sanction for violations of the most fundamental rules in and during warfare, and the sanction is punishment for war crimes, we also need, if we want to be serious about the prohibition of the use of force, a sanction for the most fundamental violation of the prohibition of the use of force as such, for the decision to take at least two states, but with all the risks incurred, the world to war. The International Court of Justice has called the prohibition of the use of force, not accidentally, a cornerstone principle of the international legal order. And activating the court's jurisdiction over that crime is nothing else than providing a sanction, and to make it clear that also this prohibition is important and not somehow second class to the rules applying during war. It is also, in the end, a question about non-selectivity. What is the message of reproducing war crimes, genocide, crimes against humanity as recognized and important crimes under international law, but leaving out one crime, the crime which was at the core of the beginning of the entire story, as we have been reminded. Perhaps a crime which is of more concern to military power. And second, the crime of aggression is about the participation of such a state leader in an unlawful use of force. So the crime requires, and technically speaking, this is also different from the other crimes under international law. The crime, the definition of the crime, requires action by a state and the participation of an individual therein. I say that's technically different, but I hasten to add, it is not a fundamental difference in practice, because also the other crimes under international law, genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, very often, if not typically, involve state action. When it comes to the crime of aggression, however, this is even a legal requirement. That's the difference. The third point is the controversial one, a very important one to which I cannot give full justice in my oral presentation, but I'm more than happy to come back by questions or in the debate. It is the so-called threshold or qualifier element, which makes this definition of the crime of aggression a narrow one, the only way to achieve compromise. Not every single unlawful use of force or the participation of an individual in such an unlawful use is covered, but only the participation in particularly serious violations of the prohibition of the use of force. This is achieved by a threshold clause in Article 8 bis, paragraph 1 of the ICC statute, requiring an act of aggression in the meaning of Resolution 3314 that was mentioned, which by its character, gravity and scale constitutes a manifest violation of the United Nations Charter. And there are probably few legal definitions where one word will prove to be so crucial as the word manifest in this definition. It was the key to compromise, and I think a reasonable compromise, because as it is true for the other crimes under international law, that international criminal justice is not activated for each and every violation of international rules, but only for the most serious ones. The crime of aggression, and the court's jurisdiction is also reserved to most serious violations. Happy to, as I said, to elaborate more on this threshold clause a little later. The jurisdiction was mentioned. The jurisdiction was that part of the negotiations that took us in Ambassador Ubalde's hands, while the definition was essentially agreed in Kampala 2010. The controversy about a final question of jurisdiction lasted until literally the very last second of these 100 years of negotiations. The jurisdiction in the end is limited, and it is coupled with stringent thresholds. It is broad and even universal in one single scenario: if the Security Council of the United Nations decides to refer a situation, possibly including a case of aggression, to the ICC. So, whenever the Security Council gives the green light, the ICC will, as it is true with the other crimes, will enjoy universal jurisdiction and can get active with respect to each and every possible manifest violation of the United Nations Charter, wherever in the world, irrespective of the fact whether the state, the alleged aggressor, is a party to the ICC statute or has ratified the Kampala amendments. So that's the one side. Same as in the other cases. The huge difference from the other crimes comes into play when there is no Security Council action. For example, because one permanent member of the Security Council has vetoed a referral situation, and we know that this happens. In such a case, so outside Security Council action, the jurisdiction is limited, and I say very frankly, more limited, far more limited than I personally would have wished for reasons of equal application of the law. But because of the powerful opposition against a broader jurisdictional regime, a compromise was inevitable in order to achieve that breakthrough at all. And the ambassador was so right in saying, waiting another year and to hope that then miraculously 1 year later the landscape would have fundamentally changed, that was no real option in political reality. So whenever the Security Council is not active, non-state parties' actions are completely excluded from the ICC jurisdiction. That was very important to a number of states, and you can imagine which states were among those. With respect to ICC state parties, the jurisdiction is essentially consensual. So both states concerned must be in agreement with the court's jurisdiction. And the controversy was the controversy which took us to this early morning on, was it 16 or 15 December, was about one, I would call it rather a technical detail of this controversy, how this agreement had to be expressed, by way of positive ratification or by way of not issuing an opt-out declaration. And I will not go into any details at this stage. These are the key elements of the compromise package. So let us conclude with a very brief look ahead. You may, of course, criticize this compromise precisely because of this limited jurisdiction. And I was very open and honest to you. I would have wished a different result. The question, however, is the alternative. The alternative, I think, was not realistically to go for a broader jurisdictional regime. It would not have been possible to get consensus on that, and as the ambassador just told us, the vote was also for many reasons neither realistic nor wise. So I think states were well advised, as so often in the evolution of international law, to make a step ahead which seems perhaps even unduly modest, but which opens the window for the next step of the historic development. It will essentially be for the years to come with the Security Council to take action, and then of course many of the critics of the Security Council will say, and from experience probably rightly so, how prosperous are the perspectives that the Security Council will take action. But perhaps two observations here. First, nobody had foreseen the Security Council to refer situations to the ICC after 1998. It has happened twice so far. So predictions of so-called experts are not always 100% reliable. History is open. And second, even if in the end the Security Council says no, it makes, I think, a fundamental change whether the question can at least be put on the Security Council's agenda, whether states and Security Council members have to justify their action, then a situation like before, where this would not even have been an issue, because no institutional framework for action was there. But, and that's my final observation, the fact that so much depends for the first next step in the legal evolution on the Security Council, and the fact that we know from experience that the Security Council, being a deeply political body, has not proven so far to be the most reliable partner to a legal institution like the International Criminal Court. That makes it even more imperative to now, in this next stage of the development, to try to persuade as many states as possible, beyond those who have taken that courageous decision already now, to ratify. Because the more ratification of the compromise on the crime of aggression, the broader the jurisdiction will be, or put it differently, the lesser will the jurisdiction limitations that currently are present will be felt. One advice that I would give to the organs of the International Criminal Court directly is to make it clear, to signal it clearly to states as early as possible that they take seriously the definition as agreed, also insofar as it is narrow, and to hereby alleviate the concerns of some states. And these are concerns that I consider legitimate concerns, that the ICC could go too far in trying to resolve deeply controversial issues surrounding the current regulation of the use of force. It is a fact, we may call it a sad fact of legal life, and perhaps we will go into that in a little detail in the debate, that there are a number of crucial controversies of interpretation, of evaluation of state practice surrounding the prohibition of the use of force. And what negotiators tried to achieve by this threshold clause is to make sure that the International Criminal Court will not have to deal with those cases as long as they are controversial. And Once the organs of the ICC have clearly signaled to states that they will take seriously the limitations, the narrowness of this definition, then, however, I believe, and I strongly believe, that there is no longer any legitimate reason for states to stay outside the jurisdiction. Then, really, once it is clear that the court applies the definition as narrowly as it was conceived to the most serious, uncontroversial violations of the prohibition of the use of force, then each state must, I think, ask itself why it does not subscribe to the jurisdiction of a permanent, fair, international criminal court exercising its jurisdiction about it. And I conclude with a quote which captures this idea from a man that I have mentioned already, the man which stood at the forefront when international criminal law was born. And as I said, it was born to set a creative precedent about what is now called the crime of aggression. It was Robert Jackson. He addressed directly the Germans on the bench, but indirectly the world as a whole, and said, the ultimate step in avoiding periodic wars, which are inevitable in a system of international lawlessness, is to make statesmen responsible to law. And he continued, saying this to the world, making a promise to the world. And let me make clear that while this is first applied against German aggressors, the law includes, and if it is to serve a useful purpose, it must condemn aggression by other nations, including those who sit here now in judgment. That's a promise from the hour of birth of international criminal law, which still resonates, and now, as from 17 July this year, there is at least no easy excuse to ignore that promise any longer. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Kress. Professor Kress, in his presentation, he presented a very authoritative exposition of some of the major points of contention that presented themselves in at the conference, last year's conference, and then he expressed, his opinion / hope that, in the future, he is confident that there is a very healthy possibility that the ICC will exercise its jurisdiction over the crime of aggression within the very narrow confine of the definition, of crime of aggression, thereby winning confidence and support of the world community. Once again, thank you very much for your presentation, wonderful presentation, and let me give the floor to our third speaker, Professor Whiting, please.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Judge Kwan, President and Judge Kwan. Thank you, Your Excellencies, fellow panelists, members of the Korean Society of Law. I want to thank and pay my particular respects to Judge Kwan. I know him as Judge Kwan because we first met when I was a prosecutor at the Yugoslavia Tribunal, and he was easily one of the most respected judges in that institution. He has made enormous contributions to a field which is dear to me, dear to Professor Kress, and to many of you of international criminal law, both at the Yugoslavia Tribunal and the International Criminal Court, and I'm deeply grateful for your contributions, Judge Kwan. I will speak this afternoon from the perspective of somebody who has practiced at these international tribunals, at the Yugoslavia Tribunal and the International Criminal Court, and I will confess that I wish I could appear before you with a position of untempered enthusiasm for the recent activation of the crime of aggression. After a long process of deliberation, negotiation, and enactment and ratification that we've heard much about. I recognize that we are here today in a country, the Republic of Korea, that has itself been the victim of aggression on numerous occasions. Both of my parents were witnesses to aggression. My French mother watched German forces occupy her birth city of Paris when she was just 12 years old. And my father landed at Normandy at age 21 as part of the Allies' successful efforts to retake Europe. Their views about war shaped my views. And later, as a prosecutor at the international tribunals, at the Yugoslavia Tribunal and the International Criminal Court, I saw up close the staggering human costs of war. And as Professor Kress said, costs that are from the initiation of war and the atrocities within war. I share the perspective of Ben Ferencz, the last surviving prosecutor from Nuremberg, that in order to prevent the atrocities of war, we have to prevent illegal war. And I recognize, as Professor Kress has beautifully explained, the historic nature of this step, and that agreeing on a definition and activating the crime of aggression at the International Criminal Court may be just the first step in a longer process of one day making it more difficult for states to resort to illegal war. However, and you knew that there was going to be a however, the activation of the crime of aggression is not merely an abstract legal project. Rather, it is now integrated into the fabric of the International Criminal Court as one of the 4 crimes that the court can prosecute, along with genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes. And so the question that I want to consider in my remarks is this: will the activation of the crime of aggression be good for the International Criminal Court? Will it be good for the project of international criminal justice? And although the activation of the crime of aggression has been portrayed as long overdue, Professor Kress described it as a 100-year project, is it possible that we've taken this step too soon? The International Criminal Court is built on 2 fault lines that threaten at all times to crack its foundation and undermine the project. It is a fragile court. First, the court does not have truly independent powers, but is instead beholden to states to do its work. In order to pursue its investigations and prosecutions, the court requires continuous cooperation from states. States that are members of the court, states parties, are obligated, legally obligated under the Rome Statute to assist the court, but weak enforcement mechanisms, in fact, give states enormous latitude in how they comply with those legal obligations. And non-state parties have no legal obligation whatsoever to assist the court. What is important to understand here is that the weakness of the ICC is not an accident of design, but is in fact one of its central defining features. The late Antonio Cassese, one of the giants in the field of international criminal law, put it this way: the heavy price that criminal justice has to pay to the traditional structure of the world society is that international criminal courts remain entangled in and fettered by the intricacies of sovereignty. In other words, the ICC is part of the system of sovereign states, not separate from it. What this means is that international criminal courts, including the ICC, succeed only when states want them to succeed. Either when the state where the crimes are being investigated is committed to the success of the court, or important and influential third parties are willing to use their leverage to insist on cooperation with the court, as happened with the Yugoslavia Tribunal when the United States and Europe conditioned aid on cooperation with the court. The second fault line on which the court is built is its incomplete jurisdictional reach across the planet. The ICC aspires to be a global court, and as Professor Kress noted in his remarks, this is one of the principal aspirations of the court. But the reality today is that many important countries remain outside of its orbit, and I think it is safe to say that the court will not achieve universality for generations to come. This lack of universality represents an important and continuous challenge to the legitimacy of the court. The ICC has been severely and widely criticized for focusing its work almost entirely on African states. But this is an outcome that is largely dictated by where the court has jurisdiction. One state in Africa, Burundi, has already left the court, and others have threatened to do so in the future. While the court has recently extended its investigations to states outside of Africa, to Georgia, soon to Afghanistan, and maybe in time to Palestine, the Philippines, and Venezuela, all of these new investigations or potential investigations involve either non-state parties with no obligation to cooperate or state parties that have stopped cooperating with the court. The response of the Philippines to the prosecutor's inquiry has been to following the Burundi example, to also commence the process of leaving the court. And Venezuela has threatened to do the same. As a result, there is a real risk that the court will be stymied in these new investigations outside of Africa, which will only reinforce the critique that the court can only target weaker states. These two fault lines, dependence on state cooperation and lack of universality, have only become more visible and more threatening to the court as we've entered into a climate around the world that is generally more hostile to international engagement in institutions. In the early exuberant days of the International Criminal Court, it was easy to imagine that these fundamental challenges faced by the court could be resolved over time, that more states would join the court and that their commitment to its success would grow. These hopes are frankly dimmer today, although there remains hope that they can be achieved one day in the future. Enter now the crime of aggression. In my view, and it's a sad one, I concede, the activation of this crime at the court only threatens to widen these fault lines at the ICC without a clear benefit to the court. The problem with the crime of aggression is not simply that it will be an ineffective crime in the court's arsenal, an outcome that would be perhaps unobjectionable in itself, but rather that it is a step that could very well undermine the work of the court and its ability to establish itself as a viable and legitimate institution. As we've heard, the crime of aggression requires adjudication of the legality of a state's initiation of hostilities rather than a focus on lawfulness of conduct during conflict. While the International Military Tribunal at Nuremberg described the crime of aggression as the supreme international crime, and as Professor Kress said, it was for Justice Jackson the most important crime, it has not been included in any of the subsequent international criminal tribunals. Not the tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, not the one for Rwanda, for Cambodia, or Sierra Leone, all of which were established either directly by the Security Council or in negotiation with the Security Council. In contrast, the process of agreeing on a definition of the crime of aggression and its jurisdictional parameters, and then of activating it at the ICC, has been done without the assent of 3 of the 5 members of the Security Council. A central difficulty with the crime of aggression, and I think Professor Kress has already alluded to this, is that it will draw the court into making legal determinations that inescapably require political judgment. When I was at the ICTY, the defense frequently tried to get the court to do this, to try to turn the trial away from the alleged crimes committed during conflict to the question of how the conflict began in the first place, which would often require a journey into the history and politics of the region. As prosecutors at the court, we were often grateful when the judges would properly turn this inquiry away from the subject of the trial. Now the ICC will no longer have the luxury of doing that. It will have to focus on these questions. The challenge for the court is evident from the definition of the crime itself. As Professor Kress and the ambassador told you, the definition of the crime requires the showing of an act of aggression which by its character, gravity, and scale constitutes a manifest violation of the Charter of the United Nations. There is an understanding attached to the amendment that specifies that the act of aggression must be manifest in all 3 dimensions. But what does that mean, manifest violation? And how will the prosecutor at the ICC make this determination? I worry that the ICC lacks both the capacity and the tools to make such judgments, but more importantly, the political legitimacy and authority to do so. Consider just one recent use of state force that could be deemed an act of aggression that is a violation of the UN Charter. On the 13th of April of this year, the United States, the United Kingdom, and France launched a coordinated missile attack on Syria in response to evidence that the Syrian regime had continued to use chemical weapons. This use of force was not authorized by the Security Council, and none of the countries made any argument that it was done in self-defense. The United States offered no legal justification under international law for the attack. None. The UK did offer a justification, arguing that international law permits it to, on an exceptional basis, take measures in order to alleviate overwhelming humanitarian suffering, and offering some conditions for a legal test when it could do so. In this instance, if this missile strike fell within the ICC's jurisdiction, I think it is likely that the prosecutor would conclude that it was not a manifest violation because it was surgical in nature and limited in duration. But it's not hard to imagine another intervention that would be broader, along similar, and that would resort to similar justifications. For example, the NATO bombing of Yugoslavia in 1999. So the questions abound. Are acts of aggression that are motivated by humanitarian concerns off the table? Can they ever be crimes of aggression? Always? Sometimes? Under what conditions? If the prosecutor has to assess a state's motivations when it uses force, will it consider just the stated reason of the state, or whether those reasons are genuine and valid? Remember that among the justifications that the United States offered for the invasion of Iraq in 2003 were humanitarian ones. And what if the state offers no justification, as happened with the United States in Syria? Will the prosecutor then consider what justifications might have been available? Proponents of the crime of aggression are confident, and Professor Kress discussed this, that the manifest requirement will focus the court only on clear-cut cases of aggression, and may even exclude genuine cases of humanitarian intervention, and therefore the court can escape all of these difficult questions. I'm not so confident for two reasons. First, whether an intervention is manifest or humanitarian is typically a highly contested notion and is viewed very differently depending on one's perspective. The victims of an act of aggression often see things very differently than the actors. Secondly, similar legal requirements of the ICC, whether a crime meets the gravity threshold, which is a requirement for all crimes, and the requirement that crimes against humanity be widespread or systematic, have often been defined very broadly and elastically, which leaves little confidence that the manifest will not face similar pressures. The point is not that these debates are wholly indeterminate or that all claims are equally valid. Rather, it's a different point. The point is that the prosecutor at the ICC is both ill-suited and poorly positioned to be adjudicating these questions. She simply does not have the authority and stature and power to do so, to enter these kinds of debates today. Whether these questions arise in the context of assessing the legality of the use of force or assessing whether violations manifest, they are questions that the prosecutor will not be able to avoid. And what legal standards or rules will the prosecutor rely on? What kind of evidence will be required? When is humanitarian action justified? What is a threat? What criteria will the prosecutor use to make these assessments? As Professor Kress noted, a state's use of force typically implicates core political and national interests of a state. It's when the state is at its highest concern and most committed to the issue. The activation of the crime of aggression therefore puts the prosecutor in a politically untenable position. It requires the prosecutor who remains dependent on state cooperation to do her work to pass judgment on core state actions without clear legal criteria. Forcing the prosecutor to take a stand on highly charged political disputes between states will inevitably invite attacks on her legitimacy and the institution. The problem is not solved, but is rather exacerbated, in my view, by the narrow jurisdictional clauses for the crime. Those limits underscore, I think, the anxiety that states felt in activating the crime of aggression at the ICC, but they also create a second order of problems for the court, and that is one of selectivity. Ironically, Professor Kress, and I think his point is right, I agree with it, argues that the crime of aggression solves the problem of selectivity, but in another way it reproduces it. Why? Because, as Professor Kress explained, the court can only prosecute aggression when it's committed by one state party against another state party, and the statute allows any state party to opt out at any time. The ratification process narrows it even further because the crime of aggression only applies to those states that have ratified the crime of aggression, which is today is only 35 of the 123 states parties. What this means is that the court will not, it can be confidently predicted that the court will not bring an aggression prosecution in the foreseeable future, except in the narrow circumstances of a referral by the Security Council to the ICC. That's the most likely instance of a aggression case at the ICC, because it is difficult to imagine that a state party will resort to illegal use of force against another state party. That's not a good outcome for the court. Why? For two reasons. First, What it means is that when acts of aggression occur in the world, victims will turn to the court only to be told that there's nothing that can be done. But it's worse than that for a second reason. If the Security Council refers a state to the ICC for an aggression prosecution, that will mean that it is a state that has fallen out of favor with all 5 permanent members of the Security Council. That will necessarily be one of the weaker states in the world. And therefore, if it turns out that the court, because of this jurisdictional regime, which reflects the anxiety of states in having an aggression amendment at all, if it turns out that as a result of this jurisdictional regime, the court can only proceed against weak states that are completely out of favor with the Security Council, that will only reinforce this fault line that I've described with respect to the court. It will only reinforce the perception that the court can only go after weaker states, not stronger states. Now, one might look at these 2 different problems. The first problem being that the crime of aggression invites the court to make political judgments that it's not strong enough, does not have the stature to make. And the second problem, that the limited jurisdiction means that the court will only involve itself against weaker states by Security Council referral, as in some way canceling each other out. Why? Because if the court will almost never have to do an aggression case except against a weaker state, then it's not going to be making the political judgments. It's not going to ever have to enter those debates. So maybe the second problem solves the first problem, but I don't see it that way. That's not my view. Across all of its work, the International Criminal Court will succeed and become strong and legitimate around the world and move towards universality only if it builds a strong, careful track record of successful and credible prosecutions. The crime of aggression pushes the court in a different direction. It pushes the court into a space where either it is embarking on cases that it is not well positioned to take on because it forces the court to confront powerful state interests. And in that confrontation, the court will lose. Or it pushes the court towards not doing any cases except against weaker states, which will simply reinforce the narrative that the court is a tool of stronger powers. Neither of those outcomes will be good for the court. What the court needs to do is focus on core cases that have support around the world and allow it to build slowly. This is a new and fragile institution that needs to be built slowly, and then over time move towards a stronger, legitimate court towards universality. We're beyond the point because the crime was activated, so we have it's on the books. So now I think in closing I'll say that the focus of the court and of those who support the court, like myself, Professor Kress and fellow panelists, focus will be on managing expectations and trying to channel the court towards cases where it can succeed and gain credibility and legitimacy so that it can one day be a universal court and it can one day be a court that will be strong enough to take on this important crime of aggression. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Whiting, for your excellent presentation. Well, when we listened to the first and second presentation, we were, we became quite optimistic, and we became very upbeat about this lofty ideals that were presented by the ICC, and especially this activation of the ICC's jurisdiction over the crime of aggression. But the third presenter, Professor Whiting, he expressed his profound skepticism about the advisability of this idea. So in a way, we can take a balance between these two approaches. So the reason for his profound skepticism for this move, as it were, is that because of two fundamental fault lines, to use his expression, and one is that the ICC's fundamental dependence on states. Which question can arise in respect of every international organization and agency. But that was his first point. And the second point was that lack of universality or the incomplete jurisdictional reach of the ICC. And so basically what he was saying was that, even though he shares the lofty ideals of the ICC, and in particular the efforts involved in the activation of the crime of aggression, but it'll end up, he predicts, it'll end up rather than strengthening, but undermining the credibility and legitimacy of the ICC. So here we are presented with two contrasting views. And actually, it's not quite surprising if you go out, if you meet international lawyers, international law researchers, international other scholars of international relations. Quite often we are confronted with these two opposing views. That's the reality on the ground. And we will address this question in comments, through comments and ensuing Q&A. And because Professor Whiting's presentations in a way focused on the presentation by Professor Kress. So I'd like to invite Professor Kress to address some of the questions raised by Professor Alex in your response. Okay, now let's move on to comments. First, our first commentator is Professor Kim Young-suk. Please.
Good afternoon, distinguished guests and colleagues. My name is Young-suk Kim. I teach international law at Ewha Women's University Law School. I'm very honored to be here together with distinguished speakers, Professor Keun-Won Lee, Ambassador Sergio Ugalde, Professor Dr. Klaus Kress, and Professor Alex Whiting, and Brigadier General Chang Sik-hong. As a commentator, I would like to comment on the activation of ICC jurisdiction over the crime of aggression briefly and in general. The decision of 2010 Kampala Review Conference on the crime of aggression and 2017 New York decision on the activation of the ICC jurisdiction over the crime are the culmination of efforts over a decade and the mission accomplished which was required by Article 5, Paragraph 2 of the ICC statute. Now, the ICC may exercise its jurisdiction over the crime of aggression from July 17, 2018. This is a historic decision. In the past, humanity has never had a permanent international court with the authority to hold individuals accountable for their decisions to commit crime of aggression. The amendments on the crime of aggression and the activation decision should be welcomed since they are progressive steps towards making the Korean Peninsula and the East Asian region free from any aggressions. Historically, Korea has been the victim of so many aggressions by its powerful neighboring countries. For example, Japanese imperialists created a Japanese protectorate of Korea in 1905 and annexed Korea in 1910. This was Japan's blatant conquest of Korea. Further, the Republic of Korea was greatly suffered during the Korean War from 1950 to 1953. The Uniting for Peace Resolution of 1950 was adopted, and the United Nations could continue its enforcement measures against North Korea. The Korean War ended in an uneasy truth that has left the two Koreas technically still at war, and the Korean Peninsula as the Cold War's last frontier. Until January 2018, North Korea has threatened nuclear attack against other states. As a strong proponent of world free from impunity and aggression, the Republic of Korea has advocated the early establishment of permanent international criminal court and contributed a lot to make the Rome Statute. Since the Rome Conference, the Republic of Korea has been a strong supporter of the ICC and for the idea that ICC should exercise its jurisdiction over the crime of aggression. The Republic of Korea signed the Rome Statute of the ICC on March 8, 2000 and ratified it on November 13, 2002. I want to mention on the Constitution of the Republic of Korea and the crime of aggression briefly. The crime of aggression amendment seems to be fully consistent with the Constitution of the Republic of Korea. For example, Article 5, Paragraph 1 of the Constitution provides the Republic of Korea shall endeavor to maintain international peace and shall renounce all aggressive war. Article 66.3 of the Constitution provides the President shall have a duty to pursue sincerely the peaceful unification of the homeland. Now, I want to talk on challenges and the way ahead. Some may argue that there can be few opportunities for the ICC to exercise its jurisdiction of the crime of aggression in the Korean Peninsula and East Asian region, because most of the states in the region have not ratified the crime of aggression amendment or are non-state parties to the ICC statute. I can agree with this argument in part only. I believe the few opportunities are much better than never opportunity. Now, the ICC may exercise its jurisdiction over the crime of aggression, and first, both victim state and aggressor state are state parties to the ICC and have ratified the amendment and have not opted out. And second, the UN Security Council refers a situation to the ICC prosecutor. In the latter case, the ICC may exercise its jurisdiction, irrespective of whether the state in question is a non-state party and it has ratified the crime of aggression amendment. In conclusion, I think it is high time for the Republic of Korea to ratify the crime of aggression amendment. History has repeatedly shown that governmental policies based on the assumption of war become self-fulfilling prophecies. However, governmental policies based on the avoidance and limitation of warfare can also become self-fulfilling prophecies. Great powers should not oppose the creation of an international regime during peacetime because of their short-sighted predictions about what their policies might be during some future war. It would be far better to construct the international regime in the hope and expectation of preventing, limiting, and ameliorating any war or conflict. All international regimes start out with defects and problems, but over time they can take on lives their own that transcend their original limitations. The ICC also has defects and problems, but I believe the ICC will be able to take on lives of their own and overcome their present limitations too. The world has got a chance to deter and punish the most heinous international crimes, crime of genocide, crime against humanity, war crimes, and crime of aggression. After World War II, the United Nations was founded in the hope of getting rid of these horrible crimes. However, the world has suffered many painful experiences resulting from these crimes even after the foundation of the United Nations. Now, it is time for us to decide whether to make the ICC fair and effective or make it arbitrary and feeble. The former is the opportunity for peace, security, well-being, and justice for generations to come, while the latter is the opportunity for atrocity, death, and injustice for future generations. The Republic of Korea should continue to do its best to help the ICC to become a powerful instrument and impunity in cases of crimes under international law, including the crime of aggression. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Kim, for your very succinct, but at the same time, very incisive comments. Well, our next commentator is General Hong, please. Could you welcome him with a round of applause?
Good afternoon. I am Brigadier General Hong Chang-sik. I am working in the High Military Court of Korea. I would first like to congratulate the Korea Society of Law on successfully hosting this 11th Korean Lawyers Conference. It is an honor for me to be selected as a panel at such esteemed conference. Although this is international symposium, I won't speak in English, Korean, because the majority of the participants are Korean, and I can express my opinion better in Korean. 최초에 이 주제를 제가 섭외를 받았을 때는 한국적 맥락에서 침략 범죄에 대한 토의였습니다. 그래서 ICC 관할 범죄 중에 상당수가 군인이 대상자일 수도 있고, 또 침략 범죄가 개시되었을 때도 군인 지도자들이 재판의 대상이 될 수 있었다고 생각이 됐습니다. 그래서 저를 섭외했지 않았나 이렇게 생각이 됩니다. 오늘 제명하신 우리 대상인 또 교수님들께서 로마 규정과 침략 범죄의 정의와 관할권 정립에 관한 상세한 말씀을 해 주셨습니다. 이러한 내용들은 매우 특수하고 또 전문적인 영역이라고 생각합니다. 저는 일반적으로 또 우리 한국적 맥락에서 또 우리 군사적인 입장에서 제 의견을 간략하게 말씀을 드리고자 합니다. 참고적으로 군복을 입고 나왔지만은 제 의견이 우리 한국 정부나 군의 입장을 대변하는 것은 아니라는 것을 양해해 주셨으면 합니다. 우리 김영석 교수님께서 말씀하셨는 것과 마찬가지로 저희 국가는, 저희 민족은 많은 외세의 침략을 받았고, 또 1950년 남북 전쟁을 통해서 많은 인명을 손실했고, 또 아직도 남부 이산가족들이 그 분단의 아픔을 잊지 못하고 있습니다. 지난 10월 1일 날에는 10월 1일 국군의 날에는 6.25 전쟁 참전했던 64명의 전사자들이 하와이로부터 송환되는 그야말로 아직도 한국 전쟁은 진행 중이라고 이렇게 볼 수 있습니다. 평화를 원하면은 전쟁을 준비하라고 한 격언이 있습니다만 이러한 전쟁을 위법화하는 이러한 하나의 방안도 평화를 위한 전쟁 억제하기 위한 귀한 방안이 아닌가 이렇게 생각이 됩니다. 인류의 역사는 전쟁의 역사였고 또 전쟁을 방지하기 위한 역사였다고 생각이 됩니다. 또 전쟁을 방지하기 위해서 전쟁을 위법화했고 또 유엔 헌장에서는 무력 병사를 기본적으로 위법화시켰고 또 모든 분쟁을 평화적으로 해결하도록 요구를 하고 있습니다. 이런 무력 행사에 대해서는 각 국가가 자유권이나 또 집단적 자유권을 통해서나 안보리의 결의를 통해서 외교적으로 정치적으로 해결하고 있습니다. 로마 규정에도 규정된 또 전쟁 중에 있는 그런 많은 범죄들에 대해서는 이미 벌써 처벌하도록 규정화되어 있습니다. 지금까지 정치적으로 해결되었던 이러한 유스 에더벌 범죄에 대해서 이제 그 개인에 대해서 처벌한다는 것은 매우 역사적이고 바람직한 방향이라고 저는 생각을 합니다. 우리 헌법에도 일제 침략 이후 건국헌법에서도 지금 헌법과 동일한 내용의 침략 전쟁을 부인하고 평화 유지를 위한다는 규정이 들어 있습니다. 우리 형법에도 개인이 사전을 개시하는 경우나 우리 군형법에서는 지휘관이 지휘권을 남용하여서 외국과 전쟁을 개시하는 것은 다 처벌하도록 이렇게 규정을 하고 있습니다. 이러한 우리 헌법의 규정과 또 우리 유엔 가입국으로서의 우리 국가가 유엔 헌장의 규범과 동일한 내용의 이러한 침략 범죄의 ICC 로마 규정 개정안에 대해서는 우리가 적극적으로 지지하고 가입해야 되지 않겠나 총론적으로는 생각을 합니다. 그러나 우리 그 침략 범죄에 관한 우리 8조 그 정의와 관련해서 우리 크레스 교수님도 말씀하셨지만은 일부 제한적으로 적용을 해야 된다고 말씀하셨지만 그럼에도 불구하고 우리 한국에서는 일부 우려되거나 또는 쟁점이 되는 그런 면을 살펴볼 필요가 있다고 생각이 됩니다. 침략 행위에 있어서 규모에 있어서 과연 어느 정도 규모가 돼야 침략 행위에 해당될 수 있느냐와 관련해서 우리 한반도에서 과연 2010년에 있었던 천안함 피격이나 연평도 포격과 같은 것이 이 침략 행위에 포함될 여지가 있는지 또한 검토가 필요하다고 생각이 됩니다. 범행의 주체와 대상이 국가로 되어 있는데 우리 국내법적으로는 북한이 국가로 인정되지 않고 있고 또 북한이 로마 규정에 당사국으로 되어 있지 않는 상태에서 과연 북한의 행위가 가당을 했을 때에 침략 범죄가 될 수 있는지 이런 부분도 고민을 해봐야 될 것이고 앞에도 제가 말씀드렸지만 아직 한국은 평화협정이 아닌 정전협정 세대이기 때문에 새로운 무력 충돌이 일어났을 때 이것을 별도의 침략 행위가 될 수 있는지 여부 이런 부분도 고려해야 될 것으로 생각이 됩니다. 그리고 미국의 이 침략 범죄 비준을 발표하지 않는 이유 중에 하나가 자유권이라든지 또 인도적 대의라든지 선제적 자유권이라든지 이런 애매한 영역에 있어서 군사활동이 과연 또 침략 행위로 의율되거나 실제 기술되지 않더라도 그러한 이유로 당할 수 있는 그런 우려가 있다고 생각이 됩니다. 그 다음, 이제 우리 로마 규정 제8조 2바에서 우리나라가 나라에서 주한미군이 주단하고 있는 이 주한미군이 어떤 침략 행위를 했을 때 우리가 또 법적인 책임을 줄 우려, 그 부분도 좀 생각을 해야 될 것 같고, 그 다음에 정치, 군사적으로 어떤 결정할 수 있는 지위에 있는 자라고 했는데 과연 어느 범위까지 될 것인지 이런 부분도 한번 고민이 되지 않을 수 없습니다. 제 개인적으로 생각해서는 2차 대전 이후에 극동 국제형사재판소에서 A급 전범자로 처벌됐던 그 정도 수준에 있는 사람들이 침략범죄의 행위자로 지목되지 않을까 이렇게 생각이 됩니다. 관할에 관해서는 김영석 교수님께서 말씀을 하셨고 기본적으로 된 상태에서 남북 간의 문제라면은 안보리 결의가 있어야 가능하지 않나 이렇게 생각이 됩니다. 그래서 한반도의 위치의 영향을 고려해 봤을 때는 기본적으로 남과 북 동일하게 침략 행위가 있었다 하더라도 재판이 회부될 가능성은 많지 않다고 생각이 됩니다. 그러나 그것은 가능성이고 특히 북한의 경우 이 침략 범죄 행자에 대해서 안보리 결의에서 조치할 수 있다면 많은 심리적 부담을 가지지 않을까 이렇게 생각이 됩니다. 기존에 북한의 많은 정치 군사 지도자들이 인도적 범죄로 행위로 인한 또 국제 법정에서의 가능성이 있기 때문에 더욱 그렇다고 생각이 됩니다. 한반도의 경우에 있어서는 그를 우리는 그렇게 우리 남한의 입장에서는 없습니다만은 이러한 침략 범죄의 규정을 해서 정치 지도자와 우리 군 지도자들이 전쟁 행위 또는 군사 활동에 있어서 좀 더 국제법을 고려하고 신중할 수 있지 않을까 이렇게 생각이 됩니다. 이것이 이 침략 범죄가 액티베이션 됨으로 인한 긍정적인 효과라고 생각이 됩니다. 그리고 이제 남과 우리 남한, 우리 한국의 어떤 자유권 행사라든지 NLL 부분에 있어서 정당 군사 활동이 혹시나 이런 가입함으로 인해서 또 위축될 우려, 실제 기소되기보다는 또 비난이라든지 이런 것 때문에 위축될 우려가 있지 않나 이렇게 생각이 됩니다. 또 하나 우리 학문적으로는 이러한 침략 범죄가 액티베이션 됨으로 인해서 특히 정치 지도자나 우리 특히 군 지도자들 같은 경우에는 국제법, 국제형사법, 전쟁법에 관한 관심이 더 높아질 것이라고 생각이 되고 또 그런 교육의 필요성도 높다고 생각이 됩니다. 오늘 여기 국방부에서 법무관들도 좀 많이 참석을 했는데 이러한 ICC 규정을 또 국내 이행법률화 했을 경우에 국내에서도 가능성 많지는 않겠지만은 그런 관할관을 가진다면 이 군에 있는 법률가들이 이 국제형사법에 대한 전문성을 더 배양해야 되지 않을까 이렇게 생각이 됩니다. 바야흐로 이제 전쟁이라는 것이 법률적으로 규제된다는 측면, 워페어가 로페어로 변화되고 있다는 이런 상황에서 매우 발전적인 그런 기회라고 이렇게 액티베이션이 기회라고 생각이 됩니다. 남과 북에 있어서는 지금 대결보다는 화해로 전환이 되고 있고 그 와중에 가장 중요한 것이 남과 북에 어떻게 신뢰를 구축할 것이냐는 것이 큰 문제라고 생각이 됩니다. 우리는 비핵화를 먼저 해야 된다고 생각하고 북한은 또 먼저 종전선언이나 평화협정을 체결해야 된다고 이렇게 주장을 하고 있습니다. 남과 북이 남북 북아침 선언을 했지만 지켜지지 않는 것은 상호간에 언약에 지나지 않았기 때문에 그렇다고 생각이 되고 이 기회에 남과 북이 공의된 침략 범죄에 대해서 기준을 하고 ICC 규정을 기준한다면은 이러한 남과 북이 서로에 대한 불가침의 약속을 국제적으로 약속하는 것으로 말미암아서 한반도에 좀 더 평화가 정착되고 전쟁이 억지되지 않을까 이렇게 생각이 됩니다. 부족한 의견 들어주셔서 감사합니다. Thank you.
Thank you, General Hong, for your comments. Well, our both commentators they enriched our discussion by providing Korean perspectives on this very important question. And in General Hong, he raised a few specific questions, I think. So I think it has to do with some of the points raised during the presentation. One is the question of the gravity of this aggression. So he specifically used some examples. For instance, the sinking of Korean corvette, which took place years ago, and then the bombardment of an island called Yeonpyeong-do. So he raised the question whether these cases fall under the definitional boundary of crime of aggression. And second question was, I think it was addressed to some extent, but he raised the hypothetical question of if North Korea, which is not a party to the Rome Statute, engages in an act of aggression, then will ISIS jurisdiction over the crime of aggression be applied to this case? So maybe as one of our presenters or commentators can answer the question. Well, so now we have heard listened to the 3 presentations and 2 comments. When I was invited to preside over this session, the organizer told me that it will run for about 2.5 hours without a break. So I said, wow, we have too much time. But it turned out that here we are. We have too little time. So we have just about 20 minutes. So I'm tempted to extend the session for about 10 or 20 minutes. Then I'll be seriously violate your human rights to rest and things like that. So I think we need to be rather economical in using our time. The remaining time. Well, I'd like to invite our speakers to respond to the questions, comments raised by other presenters and commentators, very, very briefly, in less than 3 minutes. Okay. So we'll start with Ambassador Ugalde. Could you respond? Would you like to make? Would you like to respond? No, it's just fine. Okay, please. Yeah. But as I said, less than 3 minutes. Sorry.
Yes. Well, I mean, it's obvious that the activation of the jurisdiction over the crime of aggression is not a panacea. That means that we are all going to be living in peace forever after, but it's certainly the right step in the right direction. Even if one country had made a decision to ratify the amendment, it's a positive step. Oh, we have 35 now. As to whether this is a problem for the ICC, well, I don't think that it's a question as to whether we do things or not for courts, for the convenience. We do things because these are the right things to do. And therefore, the court was tasked right from the beginning, right since 1998, with a view to addressing these 4 major international crimes. And this being a discussion, as Professor Kresa has rightly pointed out, that has already over 100 years, whether we are in the right time or not. I don't know, I think we were in the right time to do this. I mean, because it's always the right time to make the right decision. Concerning whether, in particular, what are the problems that the court may face in terms of dealing with a case of aggression, well, yes, of course, there are a number of issues. There is some are of a practical nature, and others are, of course, of legal nature. And the practical nature, as was rightly pointed out by Professor Whiting, is the ability of the court to be able to prosecute successfully in a way that it can bring down a measure of justice when it depends so much on a state's cooperation. And this is a very, very big issue. As to whether this is a court that is a legitimate court or not, whether this will create problems for the court, I don't know. I mean, the International Court of Justice only is recognized, has jurisdiction for about 70 countries. This court, the International Criminal Court, has jurisdiction over 120 countries. And I wouldn't say that the ICJ is less legitimate, the ICC, because it has less countries recognizing its jurisdiction. Whether it goes the same for any international tribunal or any international court or any arbitration mechanism, is a question of how this mechanism of justice can effectively make sure that their judgments are able to be fulfilled. And it comes down, of course, to the states. But we are in a system that we understand there are flaws. We understand that there are big countries that may have more or less interest to cooperate and do the right things. But we don't stop
on doing the right things just because of those considerations. We do them because we know this is the best way to address issues that concern humanity. And at least I can tell you that from the perspective of Costa Rica, we are happy to participate in this because this means there is a measure for the Costa Rican nationals that one day, if we were finding ourselves in the unlucky circumstance that someone would decide to launch a war of aggression from Costa Rica to any other country, there will be a measure to punish this person. So from our perspective, this being the right measure, we are happy about it, and we of course will work with anybody willing to work with us to make sure that the International Criminal Court is a successful court and that we advance in the development and the force of international law. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Chris, would you like to respond?
First of all, a word of congratulations, gratitude for how you have composed this panel. As it was obvious, I think, to all of you, Professor Whiting has presented a thoroughly different perspective, at least on a number of important aspects. And I think this is precisely how it should be in a debate like this, telling you that this was a debate for 100 years. It would be quite surprising, wouldn't it, if we would not find two scholars thinking about these issues, and also a number of diplomats coming from different countries who have out of a sudden, after the night when the ambassador let his gamble go down, when all these different perspectives would have disappeared. So it is wonderful to address them honestly, clearly, and in such a gentlemanly manner as my distinguished friend has done. I cannot now, with the superior order of the moderator to be brief, give full justice to Professor Whiting. I would be delighted to do this, now to give a second speech, which would even be a little longer than my first, to go through all his points and to meticulously refute them one by one. I will try to address one point which I think is of fundamental importance. It is not only Professor Whiting who makes that point. A number of very serious people like himself who are genuinely concerned about it. Naked, I will respond to this and then skip over a number of points. Perhaps I have the chance to take the floor another time and come to what he calls management, or the look ahead, management of expectations, where I think there is more common ground between us. But perhaps I can narrow the gap between us a little bit. One of the main points, and a strong point of Professor Whiting, was this new crime, and by implication the idea was different from the other crimes, or to a greater extent than the other crimes, will inescapably require the court to make political judgments. And this is a dangerous thing. I will not now go into a philosophical debate between us to what extent law and politics can be separated. That's an issue for itself. But that's a question that would address all four crimes. I will leave that philosophical question aside. Do not claim that politics never come into play when law is applied, but state with confidence that we have legal methods to at least confine the area where legal considerations come into and somehow contaminate the legal process. And on that premise, I find this point so fundamental because it shows us something about a prevailing conception. With regard to the three core crimes over which the court can already activate its jurisdiction and the crime of aggression, the perception seems to be, and certainly also among certain diplomats and politicians, that while we have legal methods to reasonably come to conclusions with regard to genocide, crimes against humanity and war crimes, when a certain action becomes lawful, lawless, unlawful, and even criminal. The matter is different with regard to the crime of aggression to an extent that here a decision to go to war essentially, or at least to a very significant extent, remains a political one. And this is a fundamental point, because I would argue this is one of the key goals, objectives behind a development that was triggered with the Briand-Kellogg Pact and then Nuremberg-Tokyo, to also make it clear, in the words of Robert Jackson, two statesmen, that also when it comes about the question of whether to use force, and not only how to use force during armed conflict, this is essentially a legal question. Once we have the prohibition of the use of force, this prohibition of the use of force in the United Nations Charter is not just because the ICJ liked it, a cornerstone legal principle, but it is actually one which can be clarified by legal means. There is an area, and I was very open about it, there is an area of legal controversy surrounding that norm. Nobody who has studied this area would dispute it. And I would even go further and say an area where there is legitimate disagreement, where when I take my preference on a certain interpretation of the scope of self-defense, have to accept that my intellectual adversary, while I do not disagree with him or her, has plausible arguments of a legal kind that I cannot completely refute. My point simply is, there comes a point where this area of legitimate, reasonable disagreement is surpassed, and where all reasonable experts in international law would agree this is a case of uncontroversial illegality. And why not, at least in this area, allow an international criminal court to take action and to do, the ambassador has mentioned that, to do what the International Court of Justice is allowed to do since many decades. Now, the idea seems to be there is fundamentally less legal uncertainty, less room for disagreement with respect to the other crimes. Whenever I hear this argument, I'm a little surprised about this perception. If you look back to the first years of the ICJ jurisprudence, if you look to the jurisprudence of the ICC on the contextual elements of crimes against humanity, widespread or systematic attack, there have been and there continue to be fundamental issues where interpretation is needed, where uncertainty prevails. I speak of the concept of organization with respect to Article 7. The court has not even started to deal with a crime like persecution in detail. I predict huge questions of uncertainty. It could not be otherwise. It is inescapable. Take the war crime of causing disproportionate civilian casualties in the course of an unlawful attack. Can it really be arguably claimed that there is less uncertainty, less need for interpretation with respect to that war crime than with regard to the crime of aggression? I would rather say the opposite. The uncertainty surrounding the prohibition of the use of force has been honestly and directly addressed by negotiators. It has been, so to speak, it's part of the travaux préparatoires. Negotiators have recognized this uncertainty and have suggested a solution which of course is not perfect. In no multilateral negotiation procedure you have a solution of mathematical parity, but this manifest requirement, if you read it together with the travaux préparatoires, it's very clear to what it is directed. So, I know you're getting nervous, sir. But in order to do a little justice to his argument, I need to say 4 sentences at least. So, one and a half sentences more. Now, the argument has been made that the prosecutor lacks political legitimacy, so to speak, to deal with those hard cases. First of all, very often it will not be the prosecutor alone. For example, when the prosecutor takes action proprio motu, we know he or she needs a chamber of judges even to take the case to the first procedural stage. So it's prosecutor and judges together. That's the first step. And until the case goes to the appeals chamber, many wise judges will have dealt with issues. So it's a little bit inaccurate to say it's just the prosecutor. Second point. Of course there is one political connotation. In any case the ICC will be facing with regard to the crime of aggression. This case or this situation will be situated in a political conflict. Of course, international criminal justice is inevitably about situations situated in a political conflict. And the ICC, whatever it does, will face political criticism from an interested party. Now, what is the fundamental difference with regard to crimes against humanity, genocide, war crimes? Take just one single case. The situation of Sudan, the proceedings against President Bashir. There is no single issue, not a comma, about the crime of aggression. It's about war crimes in non-international armed conflict. It's about crimes against humanity. It's about genocide. And would you tell me that this situation is not even dangerously politically controversial for the court? Of course it is, because also in this case President Bashir says this is a question of high national importance. All the defendants before an international criminal court tell this to the judges. It's always with regard to high questions of national security, and so judges, they can, from their experience, they can, so to speak,
I didn't do that, by the way.
They can sing the melody of those, so to speak, complaints. So my simple question is, why do we trust and why do we accept, and I think Professor Whiting would do the same, I'm sure he would, why do we accept that the prosecutor, together with the judges of this international institution, which we should of course, states in particular, carefully select, but why do we accept that they have enough political legitimacy to take a case against President Bashir, but not sufficient political legitimacy when, well, let's say the horrible, when it comes to consider whether the decision of a US president to take forcible action in Syria is a blatant violation of the use of force. There is also, that's my last verse, a question, so to speak, of two classes of justice, and this is something that we have to avoid.
Okay, all right, thank you very much for a very passionate response to some of the points raised by Professor Whiting. Well, Professor Whiting, I hope you will respond, but at the same time, well, I mean, okay, at the same time, okay, and he raised quite a number of points, but maybe you can just address this specific question, whether there is a qualitative difference between the three other categories of crimes and the crime of aggression, in terms of indeterminacy, which is inevitable in every piece of legislation, right? Okay, please.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for the disagreement and for the discussion. I think it's enormously useful. I think these are complicated problems, and I think it's helpful to have this debate. I'll make 2 points, and the second one will be to address your question. The first point is with respect to small steps and the crime of aggression, and with respect to the points raised by the ambassador. I see that, and I agree. There's value in making small steps, and even if just one country ratifies, and now there are 35 countries. However, the small steps can cut both ways. Small steps are moving in the right direction, but but small steps can also be incomplete justice and can reinforce problems of the court that the court now faces, and can reinforce selectivity, for example. So half a loaf of bread is sometimes better than a whole loaf of bread, but not always. It's not always for the institution. It's not always better to have a compromised version of justice, because the compromise can hurt the institution. With respect to Professor Kress's point, and the question put by the moderator, if there's a qualitative difference, I think the answer, it is, I don't mean to overstate the differences between the crime of aggression and the other crimes, both with respect to their political nature and the types of political questions that they raise, or the indeterminacy. However, I do think there is a qualitative difference. First, with respect to the indeterminacy, yes, of course it's true that there are indeterminate questions with respect to genocide, crimes against humanity. I've worked on those questions. I write about them, as does Professor Kress. However, those do not necessarily go to the core of the crime itself. Those are very much on the margins. They might be core to a particular case, but they're still on the margins of the definition of the crime. Whereas I think with respect to the crime of aggression, we're still very much in the heartland of making a decision whether the act, it is an act of aggression or not. We're not at the margins, we're right at the core. Secondly, we are talking about, with the crime of aggression, we're talking, it is where the state is at its maximum interest. And that's the concern I have, is that you're asking the court to make very difficult, indeterminate decisions where the state, upon which the court depends, is most invested. That's not to say that there aren't difficult questions and there aren't political considerations with the other crimes. It is maximized and exacerbated with respect to the crime of aggression. And I'm just not sure, I'm not as confident that the court is today in the position, as it faces the challenges of its current cases, to double down and accept a new crime under its jurisdiction and try to adjudicate those crimes when it has not yet successfully mastered its current crimes.
Okay, thank you for your response. Well, I think we have reached. I have to announce the meeting adjourned, but at the same time, well, I think you have been. Yes, I think I should. So I think you have been sitting here for two and a half hours without a break, so attentively, and so. Well, I think we should give you an opportunity to express your opinion or put some questions. And by the way, in this, so I think let me just, with your indulgence, let me just extend our session by 10 minutes, right? So here we have the pleasure and honor of having some ambassadors and other diplomats who are resident in Korea. They are sitting in front of the room, and with your kind permission, let me give them the opportunity to express their opinion or questions first, and then I'll open the floor to the other audience. So, do you have any questions, comments? Please, Ambassador from Ukraine. Why don't you use the microphone?
First of all, thank you for this symposium. It's very interesting, and since the aggression is very close to my country issue, I would like to ask a very simple question. Activation is a good thing, I have no doubt, but at the same time, it will not bring the solution to the issue of aggression, because the countries who are in possession of aggression now, who are wanting aggression and who are participating in aggression, they are out of the international criminal court. And probably it is the most, you have mentioned here the American president, I would like to mention the different president, which I think has committed much serious crime. It is not only crime of aggression, but it is crime of making the two people to be the enemies now, which is I think is much more. So my question is very simple, and I hear more with position of Professor Whiting than Professor Greth, because it seems to me that at this moment the political issue is one of the most important in this, because the decision will be taken on the basis of the political merits. The simple example of Ukraine, we have agreed with the jurisdiction for the period of time. We have submitted the documents, and one of the documents which is we think is very important politically for us is the decision of the prosecutor that since April 2014 the situation in Ukraine is international conflict. In another case, it shows that Russia is a part of it, which is for us is very important. So that is why it is very important on one part, and on the other part it will not resolve the issue completely.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And let us collect some more questions and then invite the speakers to respond. All right, I see one hand over here. And then any other questions, comments? Okay, please. And could you please identify yourself and then make your comments as brief as possible?
Okay. My name is Lazarus Estefanos Basawa. I'm from the Embassy of Nigeria here in Seoul. Let me thank you for this very important symposium. Let me thank you for this important symposium and for the invitation for us to participate. Nigeria as a country has been playing an important role in ICC. The president of ICC is a Nigerian. Nigeria is very committed to the lofty ideals of ICC. I share a lot of concern and worry raised by Professor Whiting. And importantly, let me summarize it and put it this way in a question that we see in a hypothetical case that a member of P5 can have a case successfully concluded against the member of P5 either now or in the near future, given the political dynamics that have been mentioned here. Thank you.
All right. And we'll take just one more question from the audience, please. Ms. Kim, Kimboya. Dr. Kim, please. Use the microphone.
Thank you for your presentation and great comments. And I have two questions to the presenters and commentators. The first question is, I am curious about how did states reach a consensus on aggression in Kampala review session, because I looked over the concept of crime of aggression adopted by Kampala review session, and it has three elements of aggression. I found that the first is type of act. The person plans, initiates, or executes an act of aggression. The second is using military force. Third is violation of the Charter of the United Nations. And I'm curious about when state parties mentioned about the concept of aggression, how common law countries and civil law countries can get a consensus on what is aggression, and how did they get a consensus on this? What is what is aggression between? I cannot understand what aggression is in this Kampala review session. Actually, how presenters and commentators find what is aggression in this concept of crime of aggression? That is my first question. And second is, after the consensus was made in Kampala review session about crime of aggression, the presenter said at 16th state parties session in New York in December 2017 was the time state parties agreed on this concept. Then I found that there is 8 years time element between 2010 Kampala review session and the New York meeting. So I'm curious about whether the definition of aggression adopted in Kampala session is still relevant in today's aggression concept. For example, there are many different kind of aggression can be included, such as cyber attack or using non-state parties and had a kind of aggression. So I found that do you find any review is necessary to get a more relevant concept of aggression? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Kim. Right, I think we have to go to the panel. So first question was raised by Ukrainian ambassador to Korea. Who would like to address the question?
So maybe I'll take the questions from the ambassadors, and I'll leave the definitional Kampala questions to Professor Kress. The point I understand from the ambassador from Ukraine, and I've actually worked in both countries, both Ukraine and Nigeria, on ICC cases and been in country. But I think that the point made by the ambassador from Ukraine that emphasizes the concern because in aggression against Ukraine would not be covered by the aggression amendment, unlike the other crimes that are occurring on the territory of Ukraine. As long as Ukraine accedes to jurisdiction, those can be covered by the court. But the crime of aggression cannot be covered by the court as long as Russia is not a member of the court. And with respect to P5 versus P5, no, that's never going to be done. That's never going to come to the court. And you know, when I was at the court when the second Security Council referral came to the court, the one of Libya, and I can tell you that we had in the court when that happened, we had a moment of exuberance that was not unlike the moment that's been described here with respect to the crime of aggression. We thought that referral in 2011 from the Security Council to the court showed the legitimacy and the strength of the court because the Security Council was turning to the ICC to do its work. But that has changed now. Now it turns out that a Security Council referral to the court is a bad thing because it only reinforces the notion that the strong powers control the court. And now there are many commentators who suggest that the court should even refuse Security Council referrals for that reason. So this makes me even more concerned about the crime of aggression, that the fact that the most likely case of a crime of aggression is going to be a Security Council referral, I think is only, again, going to reinforce the selectivity of the ICC. And in fact, to Professor Kress's point about two classes of justice, it's going to strengthen that perception that there are two classes of justice for the weak states and for the strong states.
Thank you, Professor Whiting. He addressed the question raised, actually two questions raised by Professor Ukrainian ambassador and the Nigerian ambassador. So
let me give the floor to Professor Kress to address the question raised by Professor Kim from the floor, please.
I would like to answer the ambassadors as well.
Oh, sure.
Because I found those questions, and I will certainly do justice to our young colleague as well. Ambassador, I can fully understand your dissatisfaction with the response, so to speak, international law has granted your country, confronted with what I would call without hesitation a blatant aggression. And let me be very clear, I have spoken about the US President because my distinguished colleague referred to this example. So I referred to this and I responded by a question. I was not saying that the recent use of force by the three allied partners would come within the definition. To make that very clear, in my interpretation, it would not come within the definition because the level of gravity that I would require was not met. So, international law, international institutions have proved, and I would say from your perspective, utterly disappointing. The only question is, Mr. Ambassador, what conclusion do we draw from this? Would your country would have in a better situation without law, without institutions, without a debate? I would humbly suggest that the fact that we as an international society were in a position to criticize Russia's action as a blatant violation of international law, which presupposes that we accept that there is such law, is fundamental. And this is what the crime of aggression is about. To say it's not just a political decision President Putin has taken in the highest national interest. He has violated a fundamental rule which was to protect your state. And I would like to maintain this advantage and to strengthen it. So my only appeal to you is, fully understanding all your dissatisfaction, do not draw the conclusion that law doesn't matter and that we should have less law than more law. And my response to you is similar, sir. Of course, Professor Whiting is correct. The P5, no P5 member would allow an investigation against its country in the Security Council. That's a simple fact. Do not dwell long about it. But now the question is, what is the consequence of it? Would it be better, because of that painful limitation, because of the inequality which is implied by this fact that no negotiator could change, now to do less international criminal justice because at this moment in time it cannot aspire to full equality? Would it be better, so to speak, for President Putin and all the other P5s if the question whether the Security Council takes action or not is not even tabled? The United States, Russia, China, those three non-state parties, they were not indifferent to our negotiations. Why is this? Because even a non-state party who is, so to speak, shielded by their power in the Security Council is not indifferent to the fact that in the future those questions will arise in the Council and states will have to justify themselves. Professor Whiting has referred to the fact that the United States, and now I apologize, I come back to the United States for once more, have not even given a legal justification for their recent use of force in Syria. Even though I agree with the ambassador that this use of force was by far not as serious as in the case of Ukraine, I consider it serious that the United States government does not even offer a legal explanation when they go to force. This, I hope, will not be the current pattern of United States practice, because then nothing will be left from the cornerstone principle of the prohibition of the use of force. If you go to use force and not even explain it. This is one element to force states to debate, to justify, and please consider, international law, this is different from national law. International law does not only count when it ends in a conviction, in a completely completed trial. International law has its effects also in a more subtle, in a so to speak, in a weaker sense, but we should not downgrade this gentle civilizing force. of international law. Now, the two more technical points, well, partly technical. First of all, on cyber, madam, on cyber, there is a widespread legal opinion that the use of cyber force is not covered, and this is then taken as an example that this definition is out of touch with reality. This is one example for discussants criticizing the achievements without really studying the issues in depth. Because if they would study them, they would see that the use of cyber means, to the extent that they amount to use of force in the sense of Article 2.4, they are very well covered. It's not said, so to speak, in explicit terms, because when the 3314 resolution in 1974 was negotiated, cyber was not yet an issue. But I believe, on the basis of a not too sophisticated interpretation, and I've argued this in some of my writings, cyber means if they amount to a serious use of force will be covered. So in that sense, the definition is not outdated. Non-state actors, you are right, madam. As I said, there is a requirement that there is a state use of force. So, for example, this is a question very often asked, aggression or armed attacks by an organization like the Islamic State is not covered, but now be careful, it's not covered by this crime, by this definition. But again, let's not criticize the crime of aggression because it does not cover everything, which is horrible. Also, genocide, crimes against humanity have well-defined limits. What the Islamic State has done falls clearly, and there are proceedings, for example, in Germany for this under crimes against humanity, genocide, so there is no lacuna, it's just a different definition that applies.
Well, okay, thank you very much, Professor Kress. And well, I think we're supposed to end our session at 3:20, but it's almost 3:40. But at the same time, I'm sure that you'll all agree that well, the 20 minutes delay was all worthwhile because we had a very productive discussion on this very important and at the same time very difficult question. And well, I prepared a closing remark, but we don't have time for that. And I'd like to express my sincere thanks to the organizers of this conference, in particular the Korean Society of Law, as represented by Treasury and President Kwon. And I'd like to express my sincere thanks to our panel, excellent panel, who greatly enlightened us on this very important question. But most of all, I'd like to express my sincere thanks to the audience who sat here for 50 hours and who raised very relevant and important questions to the panel. Well, once again, thank you very much for your participation, and thank you. And last but not least, I'd like to express our thanks to the interpreters as well. Thank you very much.
So that finally brings us to the end of the symposium. And please join me again in thanking the excellent speakers, moderators, discussants for the fascinating debate. Please join me in the round of applause.